Here, I just want to thank Tom Simpson, who's our speaker tonight, for taking the time to come in. I've known Tom ever since I moved here. Actually, it was Paul Buller that told me that I had to meet you, Tom. And I don't really remember exactly how we met, but I knew that you were just incredibly bright and I wanted to get to know you. And then the old folklore, as we were talking about earlier, came into play, and I learned that you were teaching a class that I was teaching now, and you actually created a company with a student, Josh Neblett, and his wife eventually came into it, and they co-founded a company out of that class, and he's going to talk about that tonight. I don't want to give that away, your story away, but it's a great story. And we talk about it every semester with our students. So thanks for coming tonight.
Okay.
A couple other things I want to talk about first is Mark Pigott is the guy that endowed the chair that I have here at Gonzaga. It's called the Pigott Professor of Entrepreneurship. And I wanted to thank Mark and his family for their generosity. Otherwise, we would not be here tonight. And Mark's a great guy. It's too bad that you guys haven't met him. Maybe a couple of you have. I also want to thank AJ Hawk, who kind of put this whole thing together. It makes my life a lot easier, AJ. Thank you very much. And I want to thank our Dean, Ken Anderson, for everything that he does and his strong leadership and mentorship. I want to thank our Associate Dean, Molly Pepper. She has worked tirelessly in trying to put us on the right path during this whole COVID mess. And I also want to thank Maureen Duclos, who's here tonight, for everything that you do to support the faculty and the students. You do a great job, and you always have a smile on your face. So put a smile on, Maureen. And I want to thank Dorothy Greenmeyer. She is an administrative assistant. She does a lot to help out our students as well. And of course, I mentioned Jane earlier, who is stupendous in advising all of our students, and Mary Beth Keister. I also want to thank our advisory boards. There are a number of advisory boards here within the School of Business. And we have a very large advisory board in the entrepreneurship area, and a few of them are here tonight. So thanks for coming by. And thanks for everything that you do to help our students. You do that just selflessly, and we would not be what we are without you. Thank you very much. Finally, Tom's going to talk, and then what I'd like to do is have a Q&A afterwards. And if you have a question for Tom as he's talking and you want to write it down, go ahead and do the chat, put it in the chat section, or you can wait till after he's done and go ahead and use the icon, the hand icon, and raise your hand, and then we'll call on you, and then you can ask your question. But don't forget to put your hand back down, hand icon back down. Finally, this event is being recorded, and it's so I'm just telling you and warning you ahead of time.
Thank you.
Especially Tom. Yeah. And it will be available on the School Business event site, and also on the Pigott Entrepreneurial site. I think I got that right, AJ? I think so. So I'm going to introduce Tom now. Tom, I think I talked to you a little bit about what he's already accomplished through the university, and he worked with Josh Neblett and Sarah Neblett to build a $120 million company, which was sold in 2016. Quite an accomplishment. And it's not just that impresses me, but it's also that they give back. Throughout the process, they started it in 2008. I came in 2010. every time I asked them if we could come out and see their business or if they could come and talk to our students, they always, not once did they say no. And it was such a treat to have that real world experience for our students. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Today, Tom is the CEO of Ignite Northwest, which goes ahead and works with fast growth companies in the region. And he also, for 35 years, has been a venture capitalist, an angel investor, and investment banker, and also an entrepreneur. He also is the head of the Spokane Angel Alliance, which is where you want to go to try and raise capital for your new venture. He's a managing member of Kickstart Angel Investment Funds and serves on a number of boards. Tom has a BA in accounting, right?
Yep.
From Washington, and an MBA from the Wharton School of Business. And in 2018, he was inducted into the Spokane Citizens Hall of Fame for his contributions to economic development and business in the region. I am proud to now announce Tom to go ahead and give his talk. My friend, Tom Simpson, take it away.
Thank you, Todd. Wow, I hope I can live up to all these wonderful things that you're saying. But first, I want to say thank you to you, your team, and everybody at GU, because GU is a huge community asset here in many, many regards. And I think the entrepreneurship program, the business school, is just working hand in hand with all that we're doing and others are doing in the community to strive to make this an entrepreneurial hub. And if I weren't invited by Tom Tilford initially to teach at Gonzaga, none of this would have ever happened. So I love what you're doing, love the school. And that's why whenever you ask or Paul asks or anybody else asks for me to come out and do something, I'm up for it. I had one more thought there, but I forgot what it was. Oh, thank you very much for telling me this is being recorded, because this is a presentation I've given a couple of times, but I've added kind of an epilogue to it. And now that it's a publicly held company, I have to make sure I frame my remarks appropriately. But I'll just get started here. And really, this is a story of how a classroom discussion turned into one of Spokane's few publicly held companies. And I have a series of slides here, what I'm going to go through, but I'm not really going to read from them. They're just kind of props to coincide with my comments. And so if I can be effective in screen sharing here, I will call them up. Can everybody see them? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. And I'm just going to go through this in 30 or 40 minutes. And please do ask questions or keep questions for the end, because that will be probably the more entertaining and informative part. Now, how come I can't advance my slides? Okay, there we go. So this really all started with an elevator pitch I gave to a classroom at Gonzaga in fall of 2007. And again, I was invited to teach a class out there. This is the very first class I had ever taught at Gonzaga. And I was fortunate to have in my class a couple of individuals. Really, it was Josh. And this is the kind of the founding team of what was initially called Green Cupboards. I'm on the right. Josh, my initial co-founder, and his then girlfriend and now wife, and then subsequently a co-founder, is on the far left. And Josh was, somewhat of kind of a quiet student. He sat in the back. He really didn't engage all that much in the classroom. Perhaps a little distracted, like a lot of ADD entrepreneurs are. But I gave the assignment one day to the class to come back the following week with an elevator pitch. I was striving to, educate the class that if you're going to become an entrepreneur and you come up with a company, you always need to be prepared to deliver an elevator pitch in the event that you run into an investor or a customer or a prospective employee on an elevator. So I told the class I wanted them to come up with an idea. I didn't really care what the idea was, but just to come back with an elevator pitch to have the practice in doing so. But I said, in all fairness, I'm going to deliver an elevator pitch for a company I just made up. In all actuality, the weekend before, I was out at my summer home and I had a group of people over. And at the end of the evening, everybody was trying to be very careful about where to, put the aluminum cans and where to put the organics. And unfortunately, in my lake cabin, I wasn't really set up to do that. But I was struck with the idea of how everybody was trying to be environmentally friendly in their daily lives. And I thought to myself, gee, there may be an opportunity there to build a company around that, to build an e-commerce site where people could find truly vetted green products and buy them. It was intended to be a company that operated at the intersection of Consumer Reports for green products and Amazon.com. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to use that idea and build an elevator pitch to give to my class as a practice or as an example for their elevator pitch. And this is the elevator pitch I delivered to the class as an example. And you can see I kind of highlighted the key aspects of the company, including an investment request, including sample projections. So I gave this pitch to the class, and after class, Josh came up to me, who again was this kind of quiet kid who frankly I didn't really even know his name, who sat in the back row and said, "Hey, Tom, I like that idea. Can I write a business plan for you?" And I said, "Absolutely, sure. I'm probably not going to do anything with it." And he, jumping ahead here. And so he wrote the business plan, and because he came back, he did it pretty quickly, wrote the business plan, and it was kind of back then, this was, kind of fall 2007. People were kind of writing business plans still then. And so he put together, I don't know, it was a 20 or 30 page business plan. And I was really impressed by his effort. And I still remember distinctly sitting down at my kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, reading it line by line and making comments and making suggestions. And then I handed it back to him. And he said, "You know what? Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate it. Why don't we take the next step and enter the plan into the business plan competition?" And I said, "Hey, that'd be fantastic. Happy to be supportive in any way I can." And that's the business plan competition that's actually coming up in Spokane next week, I believe. That's between Gonzaga and Whitworth and Eastern and the community colleges. So he put together a business plan, entered it, and guess what? He got first place. And I was really delighted for him. His mom flew in from Seattle for the presentation. There was a really nice reception afterwards. And I was, after the reception, I kind of patted him on the back and said, "Hey, this has really been a fun process. I hope you have a great career. Let's stay in touch." Kind of thinking I would never really see the kid again. But he said, "No, Tom. Why don't I move into your office and let's actually start this company?" Well, now I was pretty far down the line with Josh, and I really couldn't say no. So I said, "Yeah, Josh, I've got an empty conference room in my office. You're more than welcome to come down and toil away and get started and see what progress you can make." And about 2 weeks later, I showed up one morning, and lo and behold, there he was with Sarah now had kind of joined the team, and he had a couple of other interns he brought with him, and they had pizza boxes and backpacks and water bottles, and really for the kind of the next 2 weeks, I just kind of show up in the morning, and they were there, and they were working kind of late into the night. I didn't really have a whole lot of involvement with them, but I was delighted that they were making the effort to turn this into a company, and delighted that I could kind of provide them with space. And then one day, Josh kind of came up to me, and I was in a bit of a hurry, and he was usually very direct, but he was kind of talking and not really making a lot of sense, and he was not really looking me in the eye. And finally, I said, "Hey, Josh, what is it? I only have a few minutes. What's on your mind?" And he goes, "Well, we've concluded that if we want to start this company, we're going to need to raise some outside capital." And he said, "We were maybe kind of hoping maybe possibly we could convince you to put some money in the company." And I was receptive to it. I was somewhat thinking that ask was going to come along at some point in time. But I said, "Josh, I was a venture capitalist for about 10 years. And there's a number of things that really disturbed me about the venture capital model." And I said, "Josh, I'm going to give you some conditions. And if you think you can make these conditions, or if you promise me you'll strive to make these conditions, I'll make an investment in the company and see if I can help convince some other people to invest." And the first thing I told Josh is, every single set of projections you give me, I want you to ensure you are going to at least meet those projections, and hopefully beat them. When I was in the venture capital industry, these young companies would show me these crazy projections, hockey stick revenue growth, and quarter in and quarter out and year in and year out, they would always miss their projections. And it was very unfortunate, because it lost all accountability in the budgeting process, because the teams came to learn, hey, we just throw some numbers out there, but there aren't really any repercussions if we don't make them. So that was rule number one to Josh. Number two was, we're going to be as profitable as soon as we can. Again, back in the venture capital, when I was a VC, and this was kind of the late 90s, early 2000s, that's back when eyeballs were important. Business models didn't really matter. Just get customers, get users, and worry about profitability later. Well, that works sometimes, but it really only works if you've raised a gazillion dollars and really have, some enormous platform like Facebook or Google. It doesn't work for most businesses. Then thirdly, I said, "Josh, we're going to raise as little capital as possible." Again, as a VC, I saw not only millions, but tens of millions of dollars being wasted on companies that were able to raise a lot of capital, but didn't really deploy it very efficiently. So I said, "Josh, here are the 3 rules." And I said, "If you can promise me you'll deliver on these, I will invest." Well, Josh didn't have a lot of choices. He didn't really know any better. He was only 21 years old. And quite frankly, if he was kind of an experienced Silicon Valley entrepreneur, he'd probably say, "Hey, Tom, that's a simultaneous equation that it can't be solved. That dog doesn't hunt. You really can't do all of those things." But again, Josh didn't know a whole lot better. And so he said, "Okay, yeah, I'll do that." Then I threw one more thing in there. I said, "Hey, Josh, we're not going to establish an exit strategy, because I think exit strategies, it's at a very early stage of a company's development, are kind of silly." I said, "Instead, Josh, we're going to be the #1 company in our sector. We're going to grow our revenues at a rate faster than the market, which implies we're taking market share every year. And we're going to increase our profits every year. And if we do those things, we will be a target for somebody at some point in time." So I put some money in the company. I had him present to the Spokane Angel Alliance. Other investors came in, and we raised a total of $288,000 to get this company started. And on September of 2008, we had not only formed the company, but we had turned on our website, greencupboards.com, to begin selling our green products to the world. And by now, the team had expanded a little bit. I think this is our first holiday party in December of 2008 at my home. And here are some of the very early team members. Some names, some people may look familiar. Joe Herzog is there, David Barbieri, my son Connor, and a handful of other people. We also believed that culture was very important. We had an open office environment. We had flexible work hours. We had a lot of fun company events. And here's a picture of the company. This is actually taken a couple of years ago in our news space, but is reflective of the culture of the company. But we were a couple of years into it, and I'm a big fan of expressions. And one of my expressions is, only the paranoid survive. And Josh took the 3 rules I gave him very seriously. He was working 24/7. I would get emails from him all the time. And he was really focused on, how do I beat my projections? How do I get profitable right away? How do I raise as little capital as possible? And he was increasingly coming to me and saying, Tom, I'm not quite sure we can do that. The market for green products is pretty niche. It takes a lot of capital to build awareness for an e-commerce site and market it. We need to have an incredibly broad product offering. At the time, we maybe had 100 products. Our best seller was a toilet bowl cleaner. There was nothing terribly clever about our business model. We didn't have really any hooks. We didn't have a Costco membership fee or an Amazon Prime membership fee. And it was looking difficult to pull off what we wanted to accomplish. Our biggest competitor, a company called EcoMom, went out of business. We actually bought their assets for a fraction, for pennies on the dollar. So we were kind of in worry mode, but we decided to pivot. And we pivoted away from our own direct website to leveraging third-party marketplaces. We concluded we could get access to product pretty well, but we just had difficulty in finding customers or securing customers with a limited marketing budget. And so we were witnessing the progression and the prominence of the Amazon third-party marketplace. And we said, you know what? What if we just offered our products to Amazon's customers? Then we only had to procure the right products, but Amazon would take care of finding the customers. So we did a number of things. We pursued this new strategy, and we changed the corporate name to etailz, which I take great pride in coming up with. The E stands for e-commerce. The tail stands for the tail and retail, and the Z was just to add some pizzazz, because all the cool companies at the time had Z's in them, like Zulily and Zillow and others. So we changed the name, and our goal was to become the leading third-party vendor on the largest e-commerce marketplaces. And at the time, it was really Amazon. That holds true today, but we did expand onto the Walmart, eBay, Target marketplaces. And probably one of the really interesting distinction was our suppliers became our customers. The people who bought from us weren't really our customers. Our suppliers were typically smaller and medium-sized companies that had an interesting portfolio of consumer products, but they weren't skilled in the nuances of selling on Amazon. They needed someone else with the expertise and the technology to help them do that. We became their partners and they essentially became our customers. And what we would do is we would buy the product directly from them and then resell them on Amazon. And all they had to worry about was building the product and we would sell it for them. And our real competitive advantage was, first, we were earlier. We were one of the very first companies to identify this opportunity, but we also developed, some pretty deep intellectual property and proprietary technology that enabled us to predict what products would likely sell really well on Amazon. And some of our predictive algorithms included, first of all, Amazon wasn't selling it. It wasn't sold on Amazon retail. And that the SKU or that product area was gaining prominence. There weren't a lot of other competitors. And so we had a lot of technology to try to identify what products might really sell well. And once we identified that, we would then go reach out to suppliers and say, hey, let's partner with you to bring our products onto Amazon. And in addition to that, we always wanted to kind of stay ahead of the curve, to really innovate. We really tried to inspire new ideas and innovation. We would test almost any new idea. If a new idea came to the forefront of somebody, we would test it with a small capital expenditure. And if it worked, we would do more of it. If it didn't work, we would cease the experiment. And we always tried to maintain a really dynamic and fun and hip and employee empowered culture. And at the time, most of our employees were people right out of college or interns, very, very, people fresh in their career, because we really couldn't afford to pay experienced people. So we just bet on younger people and bet that, that their energy, their tenacity, their creativity would make up for experience. And it turned out to be really a very successful model. Well, now I'll flash forward. About 7 years later, we had roughly 200 employees. In year 2015, which was 7 years later or so, the year before we sold, we had revenues of 90 million. Next year we had revenues of 120 million. The year we sold, we had about 2,500 suppliers or partners. we had now raised a total of 1.5 million in equity capital. The $288,000 that we initially raised lasted us until we got to about 27 million in revenues. Then we raised a little bit more capital. We were profitable in year 2. Josh did in fact meet or beat every projection that I gave him. And in fact, at the end of every year, I would make him sign and autograph his projections to really hold him accountable. For a couple of years, we were on the Inc. 500 fastest growing company list. And really kind of most interestingly, if you remember when I put up the elevator pitch, I think we said my aspiration would be that we would be doing 5 million in revenues in year 5. We actually did 27 million. So, I kind of take great pride in kind of mentoring and guiding Josh through these highly restrictive guidelines that I gave him, and it all worked. He delivered highly efficiently on the goals that I set out for him. And then I kind of highlighted the exit strategy. I said, let's be a leader in our niche or in our industry. Let's grow our revenues at a rate faster than the market, and then let's increase our profits. And if we do that, an exit alternative will avail itself. We had done all those things. We had become, Amazon wouldn't confirm or deny, but we were led to believe we were the largest third-party seller on the Amazon platform. And one day I got a call from an investment banker, and he called me up and said, "Hey, Tom, I represent a company called Trans World Entertainment in Albany, New York, and they are potentially interested in acquiring you." Well, I was getting a number of these phone calls, and most of them, didn't seem credible. And as the individual was describing Trans World to me on the phone, I was kind of typing into Google, and it looked like a small publicly held company that was struggling a bit. They did have a very healthy balance sheet with like about 100 million in cash, but I said, "Hey, I'm looking at it on the screen here. Doesn't really look all that interesting. Thank you very much." And the way Josh tells the story, I hung up on him, but I'm not that rude. I think I said goodbye and thank you for the call. But because we were in an open office environment without any doors and windows, Josh was sitting right next to me. And Josh said, "Who are you just talking to? You weren't very friendly to them," which I disagree with, but that was Josh's take on it. I said, "Hey, Josh, it's another one of those phone calls. Some crazy company called Trans World Entertainment, interested in acquiring us. It looks like a goofy company. I'm not terribly interested." And Josh said, "Trans World Entertainment." He goes, "That really sounds familiar." He goes, "I was in Vegas recently for the Final Four and met the CEO of that company. And he and I really hit it off. And he told me he'd follow up with me. And the company's pivoting their strategy. And he talked about how he could be really a good fit." He goes, "Tom, call him back up and tell him we'd be interested." And I said, "Hey, Josh, I just told the guy no. You're really going to make me call him back up?" Well, Josh convinced me to call him back up, and I did. And they said, "Hey, we are really very interested." And I said, "Okay, if you're interested, come fly to Spokane. Let's have a face-to-face meeting." Because usually when I tell people to fly to Spokane, that kind of stopped the conversations right there. But a couple of weeks later, they showed up, and it was a company that was basically had a chain of brick and mortar stores that was selling videos and DVDs. Their business had been hard hit by not only Blockbuster, but also Amazon. They were looking for a new business to propel their growth. They had a very healthy balance sheet. And so we were open-minded. And so they came out and met in February of 2016, asked us for a whole bunch of due diligence information. And, one thing led to another. And by about July of that year, they gave us an offer. It was somewhat of a compelling offer. But I put my investment banking hat on, which I was an investment banker for about 10 years, and said, "Hey, Josh, this is interesting, but we probably should start talking to other prospective buyers." And Josh and I quickly got on the phone and started calling a number of other prospective buyers. And one person we got a meeting with was the CEO of Walmart, and got a hold of him. And it was kind of a great experience. He invited me to fly down to Bentonville, Arkansas, met with him, spent about an hour in his office, and that alone was a fascinating experience. Here, the CEO of the largest Fortune 500 company, had an office that was no bigger than a couple of cubicles, kids' pictures and crayons on the wall. Great experience. There appeared to be some interest, but in retrospect, I learned he was somewhat on a fishing expedition because they were in the midst of negotiating to acquire another large e-commerce company, which they subsequently announced. So that didn't work out. Continued negotiating with Transworld. They put forth the best offer, and in October of 2016, we closed the sale with them. And it was a nice, front page story in the Spokane Review. So that was all really, good and nice. And, on paper, there were a lot of synergies. It was, it was an attractive transaction for the shareholders of the company. But now here's where I'm going to kind of add an epilogue. And this is kind of a two-part epilogue from 2016 to 2019. Now, the first thing I did was I violated my own advice. I typically tell, founders of companies that, once you sell, you ought to try to leave as soon as possible unless you're required to stay on, because it's just going to be different. It might be good different, it might be bad different, but it's different, and sometimes it's just best to leave. And that's the advice I typically give. But I violated. I stayed on for 2 years as a consultant, and a couple of things quickly became apparent. One is they didn't really understand what we did, and although they wanted to pivot their business model, they struggled in really effectively making that happen. And we as a team weren't necessarily free to control our own destiny. Also, these physical stores that they had became a huge anchor weight on the financial resources of the company and the distraction of the team. Amazon began to squeeze our margins. They had increased fees and made what we did more difficult to do. So as a result, I actively advocated for dramatic change. I regularly sent ideas to the board of directors. They were not necessarily broadly endorsed. Josh subsequently resigned, and the company hired Kunal as CEO, which was a brilliant move. He was ex-Amazon, ex-Microsoft, ex-Groupon, and was really a very positive influence and a very good decision. Continuing with the epilogue, and this is kind of from 2020 to present. Early in 2020, the physical stores were all sold. New capital was injected into the company, and the board was reconstituted. I participated and was an investor in this new capital infusion. I joined the board of the company, and all the other board members, with the exception of one, left, and I joined. We established Spokane as the headquarters of the company. We rebranded the company to Kaspien. We changed or added to our service offerings to include not only buying product and reselling it, but also to offering our own technology as a software as a service model. We also adopted an agency model. We expanded the number of marketplaces. We achieved 1 billion in lifetime revenues. The stock price dramatically increased. And then really most recently, we raised $13.5 million in an underwritten public offering. And the company is incredibly well positioned now, financially, from a branding standpoint, from a team standpoint. And I'm just delighted that now kind of come full service the full spectrum, from this idea to a classroom, to building a business, to selling it, that we now have a publicly held company in Spokane that is very much a leader in its industry. So that's the story of etailz. Kind of just the kind of chapter one. and now the chapter 2. And I think there's still many chapters remaining in this book. And I'll now open it up to questions.
What would you say was the first moment where it really hit you like, wow, this is actually going to work? It's going to be successful. It's not just a fun little project that I'm working on the side.
That's really a good question, because Josh always teased me and said, hey, Tom, you just think this is a science project, don't you? And I might have kind of referred it to as a science project. I think when we pivoted to the etailz model and leveraging the Amazon platform and using their customers and adding our own product and seeing that marketplace was real, and then having a couple of years of confidence in Josh, I thought, wow, there's really something here. I love the green cupboards philosophy. I love the model. I love the fact that it was eco-friendly. And frankly, when we pivoted from green cupboards to etailz, we lost some people because they were attracted to the company for its mission, that we were really trying to identify and sell and evangelize really truly green products. And I love that mission, but I did always worry in the back of my mind, were we going to be able to make a profitable business out of it? But after we pivoted and we had some success with it and Josh was hitting his numbers, I thought to myself, wow, we really have something here.
Hey, Tom, this is James, class of 16 on the Entrepreneurship and Innovation board. For young entrepreneurs who are deciding kind of how to grow their business, you focused on profitability as quick as possible, which leads to the company not needing outside capital as much. There's kind of that's one branch, and then the other branch is growing the business by plowing as much money into customer acquisition as possible, growing users, but that requires more outside capital. So how do young entrepreneurs who are starting their business or have a business plan kind of decide between those two avenues? How do they decide whether to pursue profitability, which means less outside capital and shareholder dilution, or go as big as possible, but that really comes with its a double-edged sword?
Well, James, thank you for your question. It's a really a very, very good question. And I fully recognize there's a couple or multiple paths that you can go down. Because, a lot of it was my capital at first. And, I didn't really know if we were going to have the confidence to be able to raise additional capital. And because it was really the first opportunity I really had to put just my fingerprints on a company strategy. In many cases where I had invested as a venture capitalist, I was one of many investors. I was one of many board members. I wasn't, necessarily always the biggest investor. I was one of many voices. So the decision about what path to go down had a lot of input. And I just saw the downside of raising too much capital and not pursuing profitability, that this time I took the path less traveled. I said, let's do it this way. But if you're going to choose the path where, we're going to lose money for 2, 3, 5 years, you need to have a really convincing product or service that's highly differentiated. Ultimately, we'll have there's a favorable business model there, and the confidence that you're going to be able to deliver and secure that capital. But it's a bet, because a lot of entrepreneurs have confidence. Whether or not you can really do it, execution is something else. But you just need to recognize that you're going to have to find that capital, and you're going to have to convince people you can deliver. And then whether or not you actually do is either a third component. But I think, but it's also not necessarily mutually exclusive. I think you can say to yourself, you know what, we recognize we're gonna lose money for the next couple of years, but let's lose as little money as little as possible, and maintain a semblance of a desire or expectation for profitability. I mean, I think having, trying to be conscientious on your bottom line is a DNA trait you have to have, regardless of whether or not you're gonna, lose money for a number of years.
Tom, I'm curious, was the revenue, was that gross merchandise value, or was that the net profit number? And
it was gross revenue. So if we,
Sure.
if we bought a product for $1 from a supplier and we sold it for $2, we recorded revenue of $2.
Well, I'm super interested to hear how much the net profit margin changed from the pivot until, I don't know, modern times. It doesn't have to be like the last year, but I'm just curious how much that changed.
Well, in the pivot, we had three variables of our large bucket of costs: the cost of goods sold, the cost of the product, the Amazon commission, which is around 15%, and then the fulfillment, which is, 15 to 20%. Now, we would have had the cost of the product anyway. We couldn't have fulfilled more efficiently than Amazon. So our real question was, the 15% commission we pay to Amazon, would we be paying a lesser amount if we marketed it and sold it ourselves? So we came to the conclusion it was cheaper for us to pay the 15% than try to go out and raise that capital to market. And so, the margins, I believe, were higher.
Sure.
And are higher.
Makes sense.
Retail, unlike your business, Scott, admittedly is not a high net margin business. So we're in a world of small margins to begin with, but I just don't know how we could have been profitable without the pivot and using Amazon to fulfill for us and leverage their customer base.
Sure, but what would be a ballpark kind of metric that you would apply to the net profit percentage that would be low or high depending upon product category?
Net profit margins?
Yeah, against the GMV. Just ballpark. I'm just,
5 to 7% would be, is a very good target.
Great. So that paid for the whole growth and Empire and employees and all the go-to-market pieces that required to support it. Yeah.
Technology. I mean, we have a huge R&D component.
Sure.
I mean, the nuances of selling a product on a third-party marketplace. I mean, there's a lot of tech involved to do that efficiently.
Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I know my class struggles with that, but the technical mechanics of all the R&D that you were doing, was it more related to like product research and crawling to determine what prices you were establishing? Was it more related to supply and demand? I'm just super curious to hear about
a lot of it was just initially predictive analytics, trying to predict what would sell on there. Other part of it was really patrolling other sellers and making sure that people are adhering to minimum advertised pricing, the products were real. I mean, just policing the ecosystem was important. Moving forward now, the world has changed since, I was really actively involved in that part of it, but direct to consumer, shipping directly from the manufacturer to the end user, and making sure you have the stock, you can do it cost effectively. I mean, it's endless.
But the basic mechanics are that you would have your suppliers as customer, you would buy larger lots, and then you would place it with FBA and they would fulfill the orders.
Yep.
Correct. Okay. And then it was just really, so a lot of the tech was related to merchandising and figuring out not only predictive, what should we be, what businesses should we be in, but then secondly, once you're in those businesses, just optimizing them more than any other buyers or marketplaces were probably doing. Really vendors were.
A lot of things can go wrong between the point of an order is made and delivery and, sending an invoice and getting paid. There's a lot of things can go wrong in there.
Sure.
And if you don't do them correct, Amazon gets upset and will turn you off. The customer gets upset. The supplier gets upset. So just doing all of those logistical things correctly it was a huge technology challenge.
Is it possible to do a ballpark breakdown of the 200 employees just to give everybody a sense of?
I probably couldn't do it accurately right now.
Yeah, but it was like 30, 50, some number of customer service. Like it was probably a large number on that side.
Yep.
Yeah, and then a lot of engineers, it sounds like.
Yep.
Gotcha. And then the rest of the team. Okay. It's an awesome journey.
It was fun.
Hey, Tom.
Hasn't ended
Tom
yet.
Doherty here. Can you hear
Hey,
me?
Tom, how are you?
Doing well. Got a question for you. In the long run around,
You look as young as you did 10 years ago.
you do. Long run around, business is just a big cat herding HR exercise,
Yep.
right? Because you can have a great deal with bad people. That's not good, but you have a bad deal with good people and we're all having fun.
Yep.
So I'm sure there's probably some HR stories along the way. And I have one, and if you can't answer it, I understand. But when Josh resigned, when you see that bullet on there, it's kind of striking versus negotiated exit. Did he have to give up equity? Now you have a lot of students on here too. They're the next Josh, and there's some realities of life and skin and knees along the way in these businesses. But was it all hunky dory, thumbs up, or did you have to take an adjustment?
You're not. Josh was a founder of the company. There wasn't really any equity to give up.
Okay, so he had founder shares.
He owned.
Those are yours.
Publicly, we got share. Part of the consideration was we got shares in the publicly held company, and you can't take those away. So, no.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah.
Curious about in I guess the sum of all your funding rounds, what percentage of the investors were local to the Spokane region?
Pretty much all were local to the Spokane region. We did have one individual investor who manages a large venture capital fund in Seattle who personally invested, but all the other investors were local.
Okay, and then are you guys having any Angel Alliance events or anything coming up?
Well, the Spokane Angel Alliance meets 6 times a year. I think our next meeting is April 28th, maybe. So we do those 6 times a year, and then through my role at Ignite, we put on all sorts of different functions. We had one today where we have a series called Meet the Investor, and we brought in Will Price, who runs the Frontier Venture Capital Fund out of Bozeman, Montana. And he presented today and talked about his fund. In a couple of weeks, we have Ignite Talks featuring Martin Tobias, who is one of Seattle's kind of most successful serial entrepreneurs, who recently moved to Spokane and has become a very active angel investor. So we put on all sorts of events. And if you go to either the Spokane Angel Alliance website or the Ignite Northwest website and look at the calendar, you'll see them on there.
Thank you.
What's Josh up to next?
Josh is he's looking at a number of alternatives. He's being patient, looking for the right one.
I had a quick question. If you hadn't set those conditions of investment of the 4 you listed earlier, do you think you would have had the same success that you did? Or do you think that's pivotal to you guys succeeding?
you know, even if I hadn't set them on day one, I would have, because you know, Josh and I in the early days, you know, I built all the initial spreadsheets with projections, and we had weekly projections, weekly cash flow statements. So whether or not I would have specifically stated them when I agreed to invest in the company, they would have been conditions we would have lived to, but I think it did set the DNA early on. It was just very clear that that was going to be part of our operating tactics to ensure we adhered to those. So I mean, I'm a big believer in alignment of interest. And on day one, we were aligned in our interest into how we were going to financially manage the company. And Josh, frankly, took great, I mean, Josh always said, you know, I'm motivated by the carrot, not the stick. He loved having goals out there. So when I kind of gave him those goals, it really gave him some very tangible things to work toward.
Hey, Tom, another question. James here, another question. For the entrepreneurs that are out there right now, how, you know, Josh had a great partner in you and then the other backers of the company. You know, how do young entrepreneurs now who are looking to raise capital, you know, analyze and assess the, you know, potential partners that they may have? Because, you know, to your credit, the rules that you set out for Josh, you know, kind of, you know, made the company what it is today and set it on the right path. And, you know, young entrepreneurs today are going to need something like that too. So how do they assess who the right partner is for their company?
You know, one thing I kind of failed to mention is, you know, I delivered this elevator pitch. Josh wrote the business plan. He won the business plan competition. But at the time that we went out to raise capital from members of the Spokane Angel Alliance, it was just still an idea. It was a 20-page PowerPoint presentation, and you know, I was pretty far down the road with Josh. So I really kind of felt, you know, some sense of responsibility to be as helpful as possible. But, you know, I wasn't really convinced we could raise a sufficient amount of capital. So, you know, I was worried, I was paranoid. So one thing I did was I put together a board of directors to vet the idea with and to lend credibility when I went and gave the pitch to the Angel Alliance. And I picked people who were complementary in the skill sets that I didn't have. And first I went to Murray Huppen of Huppens. You know, Murray at the time, and still does, has a very successful e-commerce business. So I wanted to bring him on the board and talk to him about the idea, just to vet it, to see if it even made sense, and to benefit from his years of experience, both in brick and mortar retail and in e-commerce. Also, now neither Josh or I were tech co-founders. So I wanted to bring in someone that understood technology. And so I reached out to David Barbieri, who at the time was CIO of Red Lion Hotels, to see if he could be helpful to us as we built out our technology. And he joined the board. And then I really kind of wanted another local successful entrepreneur. You know, although I'd been a VC, I'd been an investment banker, I'd never really run a company. You know, I certainly had observed it from the sidelines, but I wanted someone who'd really been there. So I reached out to Wayne Williams, who had run Telect, very entrepreneurial for a number of years. And I got all of them to join the company. And so that's a piece of advice I have to young entrepreneurs who really don't have a long track record of success, they're probably right out of college, is to bulk up your team with individuals that have the credibility and the experience that you don't have. And I'm so delighted I did that, because it really gave credibility to other investors that, hey, it's not just the Tom and Josh show. You got Murray Huppin, you got David Barbieri, you got Wayne Williams. And, I also incentivized them, well, in terms of ownership of the company. They weren't just board members. They had a nice stake in the company. And, by a lot of industry standards, people would have said, I was overly generous, but I tell you what, they showed up at every single board meeting for 9 years. They contributed. The input I got from Murray, David, and Wayne was invaluable. So long-winded answer, but, build a strong team of board members around a young entrepreneur.
So Tom, you obviously had a huge impact from day zero until the sale and all the way through. Have they managed to rope you in going forward now, or are you still?
I'm a board member. I'm a board member now. I was, as I kind of alluded to, I was somewhat of a outspoken, vocal, regular critic of the board of directors that acquired of Transworld. And they didn't necessarily really appreciate my unsolicited input, but I was persistent, and there became an opportunity last year to affect some change in the form of a capital infusion, which I participated in. And as part of that, all but one of the existing board members left, and I joined the board with the other investors. So I'm now actively involved.
That's great.
Yeah, so full cycle. And again, hopefully, hopefully we're still early in the chapters of this book.
What would you say was your biggest mistake throughout this whole process? If there's one in particular that stands out.
Biggest mistake. And I think Josh would agree with me on this. I think we were slow to invest heavily in technology to really put us. I think there would have been an opportunity earlier on, before we sold the company, and certainly after we sold the company, to invest way more heavily into technology and into software as a service. Because we have tremendous technology, but offering that technology to our customers earlier, and we're doing it now, and Kunal and team are doing it very effectively. But if I could change one thing, I wish we would have done it earlier. But that would have required, a large capital infusion, sometime in the 2014, 2015 timeframe that I'm not quite sure we were ready to do.
Hey, Tom, this is Paul Buller.
Hello, Paul.
First of all, I want to thank you for taking that job from Tom Tilford, and for leading Josh and Sarah through this process. But also thank you for—
Hey, just step in though. You were highly involved in that too. So
well,
team effort.
yeah,
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. But I want to thank you for hiring so many Gonzaga students as interns to build the early stages. It was truly a win-win for our program and our students to rub shoulders with you and Josh. And, I think it helped you to have some young talent and maybe cheaper talent in there to begin with. The question I have is, what can we do as a university, entrepreneurship programs, what can we do differently or better to serve the entrepreneurship community in Spokane and the region?
What can you do better? I mean, I think you and everybody at Gonzaga is really doing a very effective job of in your entrepreneurial program in teaching students. You know, I would love to see. I mean, part of the success of what Josh and I did was Josh took it seriously. It wasn't just an it wasn't just an academic exercise. He had the desire to build a company. And fortunately, he had me and the Spokane Angel Alliance to provide capital. If I could wave one magic wand, I would love to see more initiatives or an initiative where we could inspire teams of students within Gonzaga to really think about taking an idea and starting a company, not just for an academic exercise, but we're really going to do this. We have this idea, we vetted it, and we're ready after graduation to take that risk and start the company. And oh, by the way, we have alumni, we have the Spokane, whoever it is that has committed to provide a certain amount of reasonable seed capital to get it started. You know, we have the business plan competitions, you know, which is coming up next week. And the business plan competition model is pretty standard from Spokane to Seattle and other cities. But in many cases, the award is not really sufficient enough to fund the company, and it's more of prize money. Now I'll tell a little story. You know, Josh actually put together a team when he presented at the business plan competition. There are a couple of other students, you know, they each got a couple of $1,000s, but they all took that money and I don't know, they threw a beer bash or went on a vacation or something. It was prize money. It wasn't really capital to start the company. But then you do have the obstacle of convincing the parents of the students that they ought to go start the company. Josh's parents, and Josh's mom is renowned in education. She works in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She was superintendent of the Brenton School District. When she heard that Josh was going to go work for a startup after graduation, she said, "You're not doing that. That's crazy." But Josh, with his fortitude and his tenacity, finally struck a deal with her, which was, okay, I'm going to go do this science project with Tom, but I'm going to simultaneously get my MBA. But somehow, if we can have some sort of instill or some sort of initiative to really a program to let students start companies after college would be one magic wand I would change. But Paul, you're doing a great job, and I think the program is fantastic the way it is now. But you asked the question, so I felt obligated to provide one possible idea.
Thanks, Tom.
Hey, Scott, you want to tell them what we're trying to do next fall?
Sure. Well, I think each successive semester we're trying to do more of that, which is get these business ideas further down the runway to take off. And I agree with you, Tom. It's challenging when you think of embarking into the world in, you know, post-graduation and taking your idea to flight. But it was just a reminder, as we were talking about the Gonzaga basketball team, no matter how good we are at any craft that we do, there's always better, right? There's always the extra mile. So I've asked, for example, in my class, to each one of them to reach out and connect with the great alumni group, because there's just such wisdom that we have in our community. It's incredible. And drawing on that wisdom is how you get over the kind of barriers of, should I start this and can I start this competently? Now, they had your guidance, right? They had somebody who had seen a bunch of businesses, had funded a bunch of those businesses, and could really help them avoid the kind of electric guardrails and getting zapped too early before their business got off the ground. But I think, Todd, you're just referring to the fact that we're looking for expanding on the competition front and potentially doing a national competition that we would point the students towards. Because at least, you know, although I totally agree the prize money is not enough to get off the ground, I think just that quality bar, to have people chase the highest quality bar that we can, is going to make better business ideas that are better formed. And then by the time they're getting into the pattern after graduation, they don't have to go through 2 to 5 years of no progress. They can make a lot of progress, and they're building a real business. So
Actually, I was talking about engineering.
Oh, copy that. Yeah, so I think that's been one of the shortcomings. When I graduated, I went to the University of Colorado at Boulder. The final class that I had in entrepreneurship that you kind of worked your way up through was 50% engineering and 50% business school. And so as a result, when you did the CEO pitch and you kind of pulled your team together, you know, half the people on my team were engineers. So it was like, well, let's go build a product. And so we've just been talking about better bridging the gap with the engineering school. Obviously, I've got a little bit of a bias just given my own career and background towards computer science and software. But nonetheless, it just feels like that's a pretty critical, essential element, because if you have 6 people who are business people chasing an opportunity, which you and I both know that there's just a lot of engineering that goes into any of these businesses anymore, that just adds a level of kind of capability within the company that puts them on the right trajectory to overcome the challenges, because we're operating in now a global economy with virtual, where, you know, it doesn't really matter where the idea comes from. It just matters how well it's executed on.
Yep.
And so we're hopeful that through expanding that style of program, that we could have more, you know, less of the kind of academic exercise, but more of the let's go build a business and get the right people surrounding the company to be successful.
Well, I think marrying the business school and the engineering school is very compelling, because I see so many business ideas or entrepreneurs where they have a great idea, but they don't have a tech founder. And there's a shortage of tech founders. There's not a shortage of ideas, but there's a shortage of tech founders. So I think, you know, that notion helps address that. You know, one idea might be, one of the challenges with the business plan competition is it's time specific. We're going to evaluate companies and give prize money in the spring of every year. But a really good idea or a really good team may not be founded at that particular time frame. And it's possible during that competition, there may not be really a truly fundable company. So an alternative may be establish a pool of capital from alumni and others. Let's just X amount. I don't know what X amount is, 100 grand, and say, we have 100 grand set aside. If a company comes to fruition that has a good idea and a good team, you can pitch it to that group to get that capital. And you're truly committed to starting it. So you've set aside a pool of capital for the purpose of funding a company that comes out of the business school and the engineering school. It's a solid idea and a good team, and they can go pitch this. And so it's not time specific. It's not tied to a competition. And let's say it's 100 grand or 250,000, whatever it is. I speculate you could raise that pool of capital pretty easily here in Spokane.
Yeah, that's super smart. I mean, I totally agree. And just think of, you know, all the success with the men's basketball program. We could build more buildings, or we could also build these type of programs. And it just feels like our region's pretty exceptional at being able to support not only the gigantic events. I mean, I just think of what we're doing with Hoop Fest and, you know, all these major programs, but just the entrepreneurial energy. I mean, there's just a lot of people who care deeply about it. And I agree. I think it'd be an amazing lightning rod, you know, for the alumni to really consider these type of programs. And look, there's already been this massive success with what you've done. And so there's clear kind of precedent that these kind of programs work. And that was just your interest and your passion, right, to continue to do this and build this over the years. But I think to the extent we could formalize some of those programs, then it would just be amazing, because there's the student energy, and again, this idea of combining with some of the more technology oriented additional schools that are in the area. I'm going to drop my Gonzaga email just into everyone, because I know we've got a number of professors and folks that care about these ideas. If anybody has any thoughts or ideas, feel free to reach out. I know Todd and I are super interested in just continuing to develop and build this program. And it obviously takes a lot of cooks to be able to pull that off. And so just if you have ideas or connections or approaches, we'd love to hear from you.
There's a couple questions here for you, Tom. John Correa, who's a professor in the School of Business, says, could you ask, looking back, what would you have done differently?
Well, I think I addressed that. The one regret or one thing I think I would have done differently is to more closely evaluate further developing our own software to be sold as a service to our partners earlier than when we did do it.
There's another question from Jay Lopez. Would you recommend a first-time founder go all in on entrepreneurship or go at it incrementally as a moonlighting project?
It just, that's a hard question. I mean, the way that question is often presented to me is someone just graduates from Gonzaga and they know they want to be an entrepreneur. Do they go work for a startup right away, or do they go get experience somewhere? And, I think it kind of depends upon what the opportunities are. If you're right out of college and you have a chance to go work for a really compelling name brand technology company and get that experience, that might be really very valuable. I started off my life as a CPA for Deloitte Haskins and Sells, and that couple of years of rigorous training and maturity was really important. And then it gave me the flexibility to do whatever else I wanted to do from there. So if you're right out of college and you can go work for a Google, Facebook, or any other kind of name brand tech company, that'd be hard to turn down. You can always become an entrepreneur later, and you'll get anointed. You'll get some real skill sets. At the same point in time, if you have an opportunity to work for some really cool new startup like Scott's company, hey, maybe you do that too. I don't think there's really necessarily a wrong answer. It kind of depends upon what your real viable choices are. I think there's another question. Should non-technical founders try and familiarize themselves with technology and computer science prior to talking with technical co-founders? Well, I think, having an understanding and an appreciation of, whatever technology your company intends to develop or deploy is important. But I still would think, I wouldn't have that be a substitute from finding a technical co-founder. I think it's really important to have co-founders. I mean, a number of angel and venture funds won't even invest in a company that doesn't have, at least two co-founders. So I think, and you want to have a co-founder for so many different reasons, just to bring in the skill sets that you don't have, to have complementary backgrounds. But also, despite the success that we had with etailz, there were some dark days and hard nights, and you want to have someone else the shoulders to cry on, so to speak, to kind of build each other up. So I think, it's important to have a co-founder, and I think it's, so I wouldn't have your familiarization, so to speak, be the replacement for having a technical co-founder.
What's an
Good question.
ideal size of a founding team?
Oh, 2 to 3. It can be kind of depends upon the stage, but I think 2 or 3. 2 works. 3 can also work too. More people pulling the oars. 1 is the wrong number, though.
What's the best and worst part about being an entrepreneur?
Well, the best part, I first, one thing when you talked about my background, you didn't mention I grew up in Spokane. I grew up here. Went to Wilson and Sacagawea and Lewis and Clark High School. So I love this area, and so I love what I do because I get to kind of help this community that I love. I get to. But kind of as an angel investor now and working with Ignite, I get to be around entrepreneurs and all these new and innovative ideas and creativity and energy. I mean, that's the part that I love. I mean, just hearing new ideas and meeting new people, and particularly young people with their ideas. The downside is, all ideas don't work out as expected. And so, you're on day one, when you invest in a company, you love the idea, you love the team, but 6 or 9 months later, it often doesn't look quite as pretty. And things, turn out to be different than what you expected. And then having to manage through that is not often easy, because it may require firing people. It may require, some heavy lifting in terms of pivoting, like we did at Green Cupboards. It may involve a down round and raising new capital. Those are the ugly underpinnings and realities of being an entrepreneur. You start off with a vision that everyone loves, but then, there are hard decisions that have to be made. Letting go founders, letting go of team members, pivoting. But on day one, it all looks great.
So where do you see opportunities in the future?
In terms of industries or new businesses, or
If I'm a student and I'm an entrepreneurship student, where should I be heading? Where are the opportunities?
geographically, or electric powered
industry.
vehicles, or
Industry wise?
I don't know if I'm smart enough to answer that question. Because whatever really cool idea that, you and I can talk about ideas right now, but they're ones that are probably already relatively mature. And there's going to be companies formed in the next 3 to 5 years in industries and ideas that none of us have ever heard of right now. So I encourage students just to be curious and stay involved, and in Spokane at least, participate in some of the things that we're doing with Ignite, and just stay current, stay involved, learn and read. And I kind of refer it, I often talk about, I had luck with Green Cupboards, but luck isn't, everyone needs luck in their career, but luck isn't really luck. Luck is the intersection of hard work and opportunity. And when I talk about that, I give a visual, which is a ball machine. So in life, and particularly young people, put yourself in front of ball machines constantly. You know, be curious, go to meetings, do things, read, stay involved. That's putting yourself in front of a ball machine that's constantly spitting out entrepreneur opportunities. And then when you're in front of the ball machine, don't just stand there, keep swinging and swinging and swinging, work hard. And even if you're not a good batter, you're likely to hit some home runs and get lucky. So kind of a long-winded answer, but just stay engaged, be curious, meet people, stay current, do odd things. And if you do that and you do it with passion and with consistency, you'll probably stumble across the next new idea, which I don't know what it is today.
Thanks, Tom. Anybody else have any questions for Tom? I see another one on the screen.
Do you have any resources for new founders or aspiring entrepreneurs to understand the accounting, legal, all that sort of stuff? That's an important part of starting a company. It's the more mundane part of it. It's important. But I don't have any direct resources for that. You know, the classes and programs at the local universities and colleges are good. You know, but you know, a lot of that at a very early stage can be outsourced. You know, to an attorney, you know, to bookkeepers or accountants. So it's not one that I focus, and he was highlighting that today, and it's echoing what I am seeing. And I don't know how to fish, and I'm a poor golfer. I guess I can fish. They never bite my hook.
Any other questions? We got another one, it looks like.
What does rest look like to you? You know, I do have a balanced lifestyle. You know, I've over the years, I've done a number of triathlons. So I run, bike, and swim. I've done 5 Ironmans. About 5 years ago, I got really involved in yoga. So I do yoga just about every day. When I was a teenager, I learned to fly. So I'm a private pilot, and I'm taking possession of a new airplane this summer. You know, my wife and I have 6 kids, grandkids, so that's fun. So I know that doesn't sound like rest, but it is things outside of a normal work day. I don't sit still. I don't sit still well, nor can I even say the words sit still. But those are things I enjoy outside of the other things we've been talking about today. But most entrepreneurs, but a lot of really, I mean, if I look at the people in Spokane who, you know, are cut from the same cloth I am, they don't sit still either. Josh could never sit still. Andy Barrett, who I kind of refer to as the Steve Jobs of Spokane, he can't sit still. I mean, it is kind of a restlessness is a byproduct of entrepreneurship. And Scott, you can't sit still either.
What is that called? ADHD or ADD or
something like that?
A lot of entrepreneurs have that.
Yeah, or restless leg syndrome. That's my favorite disease. I mean, seriously.
Well, this is your last opportunity to ask Tom a question. I'll give you a couple seconds here.
Well, while people are thinking about a question, I just wanted to say, Tom, I'm so grateful. I was going to say that you chose Spokane, but it seems that Spokane chose you. But I'm just grateful for all that you do.
Well, thank you, Scott. And I'm delighted to have you in Spokane. And similar, you've been doing a lot of terrific things in the community. You mentored and guided many of the mind to market companies, and delighted to see the success you're having with Cloud Engage, and really delighted that you're a co-tenant in the building with us.
I appreciate that.
It's a good team effort here.
Yeah, I got Scott on in our entrepreneurship program after I went out to Jack and Dan's with him one day. I asked him if he wanted to teach. And luckily for us, he just said yes. Well, I don't have any other questions. Thank you so much for coming in tonight, Tom. You're awesome.
Well, thanks for inviting me. And Todd, you're awesome. I love what you're doing out there, the energy you're providing, the contribution that GU is making in the community in so many different ways. Let's just go out and continue to do more of it.
Spokane has changed so much for the better, I'll tell you.
It has.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. I can't say go drive home safely because you're probably already home. But thank you for coming tonight, and hope to see you next year.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Tom.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hey, Todd, so are we going to stay on with Piece of Cake?
Yeah, we're going to stay on with Piece of
Perfect.
Cake.
Yeah, so for my class, if you can just hang on, we're going to do we're helping to prep